As a single dad, I let a terrified runaway sleep here, then her mother brought cops. It all started as freezing rain hammered hard against the glass of my small roadside diner. I made a choice to protect someone nobody believed, risking everything I had carefully built. This girl was violently shaking, completely soaked, telling me she had absolutely nowhere left to go. I simply gave her a safe place to sleep. But barely a few hours later, my front door burst wide open. Officers flooded in. Behind them stood this powerful woman, trembling with an ugly, barely contained rage. I had absolutely no idea that protecting her meant uncovering a toxic secret this whole town guarded. You tell me, what would you do if defending a scared kid put you against the law? My diner sat right on the rough edge of a dark two-lane highway, like something the world had just mostly forgotten. Just a squat building, the buzzing neon sign flickered, throwing a warm orange glow across the gravel lot every night. It felt like a dim lighthouse for lost travelers with nowhere better to be. The sign outside read Carter's, and it had said exactly that for 3 years now. Ever since I packed up the broken pieces of a former life that no longer existed back in the city, rebuilding out here on the margins where nobody asked me too many probing questions, and nobody expected any real answers. I was 29 years old, though most mornings I honestly felt much older. I had the rough hands of a man who cooked to survive, calloused fingertips, scarred knuckles, never completely clean no matter how brutally I scrubbed. I used to work in serious culinary kitchens before this. The upscale kind with white tablecloths and expensive wine lists thick as novels. Places where executive chefs threw hot pans across stainless steel counters and actually called it inspiration. I was genuinely good in that high-end world, precise, fast, and completely controlled under pressure. The kind of chef who could hold 6 simultaneous orders in my head and plate them all flawlessly. But after my world collapsed, I needed something smaller, something I could actually protect in both hands. I really hated talking about why I finally walked away. The few loyal regulars who showed up on weekday mornings knew better than to press. They only knew about the accident in broad strokes, that slick, wet road. That reckless driver who completely blew through a red light without ever slowing down. That freezing hospital room where I sat entirely alone for 11 hours before a nurse finally found me. But they never asked for the painful details, and I definitely did not offer them. What they saw instead was just a guy who cooked perfect eggs and kept the black coffee hot, and smiled in a forced way that never reached my eyes unless my daughter was nearby. My little girl Hannah was 6 years old, completely unfazed by the strangeness of growing up inside a diner. She quietly did her school homework in the corner booth every evening, spreading her scattered worksheets across the cheap laminate tabletop like she owned the place. Because in every single way that actually mattered, she did. She had her late mother's quiet intensity and my stubborn habit of studying people before speaking. She noticed things. She could spot when a customer walked in carrying deep grief behind their eyes. She always knew when I managed to sleep for less than 4 hours. She just noticed everything. And she tucked those quiet observations away with a heavy patience that seemed far too big for her. We stayed open 24 hours. Stick with me, because that dead stretch before 5 is when everything changed. Listen, truckers stopped sometimes. Maybe a couple driving through after a late show. Now and then, a drifter counted coins before ordering. I never made it hard on them. I know exactly what it feels like to need something but lack the means to ask. On a normal night shift, the diner's rhythm felt almost completely meditative. Just the hum of the fridge behind my counter. The steady sound of rain hitting the old flat roof. That broken radio played whatever was on. Changing the dial meant admitting I actually cared. But that October night the storm rolled in hard and fast, blowing sideways like it does around here, cold, sharp, and totally relentless. My daughter Hannah crashed in the corner booth around 9. Her spelling homework still half finished right beneath her cheek. I draped a blanket over her, then went back to wiping down the diner counter. Listening to the rain, my mind totally blank. I was not the kind of guy who expected surprises anymore. Life cured me of that. Let me show you what happened at 11:47. I heard it before I saw her, the heavy groan of the door swinging in, then a freezing wet rush of air slapping the floor tiles right by the entrance. I turned from the register, and there she stood. A runaway girl, maybe 14 or 15 years old. Standing in the doorway, water pouring from her hair and clothes. One arm wrapped tight around herself, her other hand pressed against the glass. Like she could not decide whether to come inside or bolt back into the storm. She definitely wasn't dressed for the weather. A flimsy zip jacket, dark shirt and jeans soaked right down to the bone. Her sneakers squelched loudly as she finally stepped inside and let the door shut. She made eye contact with me for exactly 1 second, then looked away. Her eyes scanned my diner. It was the quick, frantic look of someone checking every single exit. I recognized that terrified stare, not often but enough times. "Take a seat," I told her, keeping my tone perfectly neutral. That quiet voice you use with a stray animal so you don't spook it. She moved over to a counter stool and sat down carefully, like she wasn't even sure she belonged there. Her hands pressed flat against the laminate, shaking like a leaf. The poor kid was somewhere between freezing cold and absolutely terrified. And honestly, I couldn't tell which was doing more damage. "What can I get you?" I asked. "Just water," she mumbled, "if that's okay." Her words came out tiny and cautious, totally braced for me to say no. I slid a glass of water in front of her without a word. Then I went back to fixing condiments, giving her the space of not being stared at. That is a lesson I learned a very long time ago. You and I know, sometimes the kindest thing is just looking away. She didn't have a phone. I noticed that when she placed her hands on the counter. No device, no bag, absolutely nothing to suggest she came prepared for any version of tonight. She never reached for the diner menu. She didn't order food. She just gripped the glass, staring at the water like it was the most complicated puzzle she had seen all night. Her name was a secret I hadn't even uncovered yet. Her name was Sophia. You and I both know that kind of night. She was 15, walking 2 hours before the lights of Carter's diner finally appeared through the heavy rain. She walked in simply because my lights were burning. Out here at this hour, lights on means someone is still awake and willing to hold the line against the dark. For a terrified runaway, that was the only qualification that mattered. I noticed her watching me from the very edge of her vision. She had clearly learned how to assess strangers without making eye contact. Because looking right at someone makes them feel entitled to stare back. But I wasn't doing that. I wasn't tracking her the way she expected. I just kept doing ordinary diner tasks, filling sugar dispensers, washing a coffee mug. I didn't make a big show of looking away either. That brings its own kind of heavy pressure. I just let her be. For her, that was weird enough to notice. Over in the corner booth, my daughter slept under a fleece blanket. Her hair covered a spelling worksheet, a stuffed rabbit tucked under her arm. I saw her stare at my kid, and I recognized that painful, breathless tightening in the runaway's chest. I walked over and topped off her water without asking. Then I slid over some buttered toast. "You don't have to eat it," I told her. "Just had extra." I definitely did not. But neither of us needed to point out that obvious lie. Sophia just stared at that bread for a long time. Finally, very quietly, she asked, Can I stay here for a little while?" I finally looked at her, really looked. I took in the soaked clothes, those terrified eyes, and the shrinking posture of a kid who nobody believed, trying to take up zero space. "Yeah," I told her, "of course you can." She devoured that toast fast, though she took tiny, careful bites, like she expected me to snatch it away mid-chew. I poured her a bowl of hot soup and slid it across the counter. She stared at it, shot me a quick glance, then quietly ate every drop. I observed her from the corner of my eye, staying patient. Half my brain was doing the dark math of this situation. The exact same calculations any responsible father would run. A minor completely alone, no phone, and running from somewhere bad. Let's be honest. The standard move is calling the police and letting the system handle it. I knew the rules, I wasn't naive about the law. But I also know exactly how those broken systems actually operate. Growing up here, I saw firsthand which local foster homes kept kids safe, and which ones absolutely destroyed them. And I have spent way too long sitting in sterile waiting rooms, dealing with officials, learning that what looks right on paper and the actual safe outcome almost never arrive at the very same address. I had spent the last 3 lonely years raising my daughter with fierce precision, because I knew if someone had been more careful, had someone just paid attention on a wet Tuesday afternoon, had someone stopped instead of driving past, I wouldn't be raising my kid alone tonight. You and I know the bitter truth. If just one passing stranger had paused to help before my tragedy became permanent. I kept those thoughts to myself. You warm enough? I asked her. Sophia just nodded, though her frail shoulders were still trembling. I headed back and grabbed the old gray pullover I always hung by our utility closet. It was a cheap gas station hoodie I had kept. I dropped it on the counter beside her. She threw it on right away. I saw her guard drop just a fraction. What's your name? I asked. Silence. Sophia. Okay, Sophia, I'm Wyatt. I didn't push for a last name. You don't have to tell me anything you don't want to. But I must know one thing. She glanced up. Are you in danger right now? Immediate danger. That question actually seemed to catch her off guard. She honestly paused to think. She sat with it, which told me plenty, then whispered, Not right this second. Okay, I nodded exactly once. You can stay. You might think I acted recklessly, but protecting someone nobody else believes takes conviction. The small room behind our diner kitchen held a sturdy cot I usually used during those occasional long nights when driving home just was not worth the hassle. The door had an inside lock. It was completely private and it was perfectly safe. I laid this out plainly for her. I promised I wouldn't bother her at all. I explained I would stay at the main counter all night, and she could easily hear the front door's warning bell from back there. By morning we could figure out our next move together, but only if she wanted to. And if she wanted out, she was totally free to walk and I'd never block her way. Sophia took in my every word, her pale hands firmly wrapped around the hot soup bowl. Why would you do that? She quietly asked me. It was a completely fair question. I really waited honestly. Because you need a safe place to crash, and I actually have one, I answered. That's it. She studied my face, desperately searching for a trap in a world that doubted her. Then she slipped off the diner stool and quietly followed me into the back room. She sat right on the cot's edge, staring down at the floorboards. Thank you, she whispered. I nodded back once, pulling the heavy door shut behind me. My daughter Hannah woke up around midnight. She always sensed when the diner's quiet atmosphere suddenly shifted. She climbed down from our corner booth, dragging her little blanket, padding into the kitchen in socks. She found me leaning against the prep counter, just nursing a hot cup of coffee. There's a terrified girl in the back room, I told her before she even asked. Hannah absorbed my words with that heavy, measured seriousness she applied to absolutely everything. Is she sad? I really think so, I answered. Okay. She simply walked back to her booth and slept again. Know that dead-of-night feeling? By 3 a.m, the rain became a steady drizzle. I walked a slow circuit around the empty restaurant, checking door locks and refilling salt shakers. Just mindless maintenance to occupy my rough hands when my protective instincts wouldn't settle down. Through the thin wall, I heard nothing. But twice I noticed that faint sliver of light under her door go totally dark, then return. Just clicking off, then right back on. Off, then on again, like she desperately wanted to sleep but her deep panic kept changing her mind. Around 4:30, a heavy truck pulled into our lot. Blinding headlights swept across my front windows. My front doorbell never rang, yet from that back room came a sharp noise, a sudden gasp. Furniture scraped the floorboards. The unmistakable sound of someone terrified, scrambling upright in total panic. I watched that sliver of light under her door stay on. I knocked gently. Just a truck, customer pulling in. You're safe, silence, then okay. By 7 a.m., my daughter Hannah emerged with her math worksheet and stuffed rabbit, taking her usual booth. She kept eyeing the back room door with this forced casualness only a kid who's made a secret choice can pull off. While I was busy cracking eggs for a trucker, Hannah quietly slipped away from her booth, marched right up to the back room, and knocked. I spun around to stop her, but the door already opened. Sophia stood there, holding herself stiff like someone running on absolutely zero sleep. She stared down at Hannah. My girl just stared right back. Hannah lifted up her stuffed rabbit. For a second, Sophia just froze. Then she accepted it, clutching the toy in both hands. An expression crossed her face that I hadn't seen since she first stumbled out of that storm. Something totally unguarded, a fragile, genuine smile that finally felt real. What's his name? Sophia whispered. Carrot, Hannah stated, like it was completely obvious. I'll take good care of him. I know, Hannah replied, wandering back to her booth. I just watched, speechless. I turned back to my grill, but later, once the trucker left and the diner faded into a peaceful mid-morning lull, Sophia sat at my counter sipping the fresh coffee I had, poured her, and mumbled something I've been obsessing over ever since. "They won't stop looking," she murmured, not even talking directly to me. She was speaking to the countertop, to the coffee mug. "You and I both know the sheer terror of being hunted by people who believe they own you. They never stop, that's the truth, they never quit." I didn't push her. I just slid some warm pancakes in front of her and let those heavy words hang in the air. My diner started its proper morning shift at 6 a.m., and by 8 4 regulars were claiming their booths. Dale, an old highway inspector, and Carol, a night shift nurse who visits me twice weekly, plus 2 local farmers sitting at opposite ends of the counter, shouting their whole conversation like they were still standing in open fields. Hannah had already poured herself 2 juices, completely lost in the tangled logic of a math problem about fractions. It felt almost completely normal, which is exactly what made it so eerie, how easily she blended into our morning. Sophia finished her pancakes, a fried egg, and even grabbed a piece of toast herself without waiting for me to offer it. I noticed that immediately and marked it down as a massive win for us. Grabbing some food without needing permission. Even a simple piece of toast meant she was finally taking her power back. By 9 a.m., the regulars cleared out and the diner's morning chatter quieted down. Sophia walked her empty breakfast plate to the kitchen window with the smooth confidence of a girl raised in the service industry. "You and I know I had to ask. You need to plan your next step. I can help you with that if you want." Sophia just leaned against my counter, staring out the glass at the highway traffic blurring past. Every single road was a direction she could theoretically run. "My family has money," she told me, like serious money. "It's not nothing, but it rarely means what people think." I just waited. "My mother runs everything, absolutely everything." She said the word like it was a sharp weapon. The house, the schedule, the private school, the clothes, who I speak to, what I study. She calls it structure, says it's just because she cares. Silence. I used to believe that, so what changed? I turned 15. She looked right up at me. She built this massive plan for my 16th birthday, a press release, announcing some fake junior board role at her corporate firm. She wanted staged photos of me in a suit, shaking hands with all her wealthy board members. Never even asked me, just ordered me what to wear. I kept my expression neutral, though my own chest tightened. I told her no, Sophia went on, first time I ever pushed back. She didn't scream, she never yells. She just went perfectly quiet and still. And she calmly explained to me that my feelings were not relevant data. That phrase, not relevant data, hung between us, freezing and deliberate. "That night I just left," she said incredibly quietly. I opened my mouth to speak. "You know that feeling when you just want to help?" I was searching for someone who would actually believe her. An aunt, a school counselor, a friend's mom, anything measured useful and actually real. I never got the chance. The bell above the diner door violently rang, not the soft chime of a regular morning customer. This was the aggressive crash of a door kicked wide open. The bell clanged loud, instantly silenced as the glass hit the wall. 2 police officers walked in first, heavy, alert, and purposeful, striding the way cops do when they carry strict authority and fully expect everyone to blindly buy their narrative. Hands resting near their belts, eyes sweeping my diner before the door even closed. Right behind them stepped a woman, dressed for a boardroom, not a frantic search, dark-tailored blazer, expensive bag resting at her elbow. Her heels clicked against the tile with the sharp rhythm of someone used to completely owning every room. Probably somewhere in her early 40s. Calm in that rigid way only seriously wealthy people learn to project. Every feature perfectly arranged. But when her eyes locked onto Sophia at my counter, the mask slipped. Those were the manic eyes of a woman running on 0 sleep. Alexandra Blake stood inside my diner's entrance at exactly 9:45 in the morning. Spotted her daughter. Then she noticed me. And the look that shifted across her face in that split second, I recognized it instantly. You'd expect relief, right? The pure joy of a mother finally reunited with a terrified runaway child. Instead, it was cold fury, cleanly repackaged as deep grievance and ugly accusation. The arrogant certainty of a parent who knew she would be believed. The twisted story she was selling, knowing nobody would ever believe the kid. "There she is," Alexandra snapped, but she aimed those words at the cops, not Sophia. The first cop was heavy-set, graying at the temples, nameplate read Hendricks. He looked between me and the girl, then focused on her. "You okay, miss?" Sophia stayed silent. Her mother was already moving. She crossed the diner floor with the exact precision of someone rehearsing a routine. She stepped right between Sophia and my counter, turning her back half toward me, claiming the space and the story before I could even speak. She was taken from her home, she told the officers, by this man. That word taken hit the diner like a physical weight, like a dropped stone. I slowly set down the dish towel I was holding. I went completely still. "Ma'am," the second officer started. "She is 15 years old, a minor, she's been here overnight." The woman's voice was perfectly calm. Every word delivered like someone who knew exactly how to manipulate a room. "I want to know exactly why he thought he could keep my child from me." "Nobody kept anybody," I said. "Sir, I need you to step back," Hendricks warned. But I heard the slight doubt hiding just underneath the cop's tone. Over in the corner booth, my daughter Hannah stopped doing her homework. She sat frozen, watching me with those wide, dark eyes of hers. "She walked in here last night in the pouring rain," I said, keeping my voice steady, sounding like a guy with zero to hide, because I fully understood that. Panic was the absolute last thing that would help anyone here. She was freezing, completely alone, and had nowhere else to turn. I gave her some warm food and a safe corner to sleep. That is the whole truth of what happened. Alexandra finally turned to face me completely. Her face shifted, looking like someone who hadn't expected a night shift cook to stand his ground. He had absolutely zero authority to make that choice. She snapped at the cops. "She's a minor, he's just a stranger. Whatever he's saying, he didn't do anything." Sophia finally spoke. Her voice was faint, almost too quiet. But every single person in the diner heard her. Alexandra slowly turned toward her daughter. That perfect mask never cracked. It did something much worse, honestly. It just tightened up. "Sophia," she said, using that freezing tone every scared kid knows means heavy consequences are coming next. "You are not helping this. He didn't do anything wrong." Sophia repeated, pushing her voice louder. From her corner booth, my little Hannah gasped softly. Then in a whisper too faint for the cops to catch, but loud enough for me. "Because I always listened to her," she echoed. "Daddy didn't do anything wrong." Officer Hendricks uneasily shifted his weight. I could tell Alexandra Blake never stumbled. She'd clearly survived tougher rooms than my diner, fighting off rivals who wanted what she had. Boardrooms and meetings where angry men tried changing rules she had already set in stone. Moments where people tried painting her as the villain, but failed because she always controlled the story. Alexandra knew how to handle pressure. She knew exactly how to play a room where emotions ran hot, leaning hard on her clear advantage of wealth, status, and cold preparation. Then she pivoted. "I'm not here to argue," she told the cops, her voice suddenly shifting, going softer. A little more measured. She somehow buried the furious CEO, pulling out this perfect manufactured performance of a deeply worried mother. I was out of my mind with worry all night. My daughter has had some struggles recently, emotional struggles. And finding out that she stayed the night with a complete stranger, well, she wasn't struggling. I said, "Sir," but Hendricks held up a hand. "Let her finish," Alexandra went on. "Listen, you and I know the most dangerous lies are smooth. They use real facts to build a completely fake story. Yes, the kid had been unhappy recently. Sure, there was tension at home, but her real accusation was never spoken completely out loud, always implied through very careful word selection. She hinted that I had somehow encouraged the girl's presence, maybe even welcomed a runaway in ways a responsible grown man definitely would not. She never used the word lured, she used the word allowed. 6 times in 4 minutes, I just stood there watching Hendricks take his notes. I watched the younger, quieter cop, Torres was his name, studying Sophia. I watched Alexandra's hands, still calmly positioned right in front of her. The practiced openness of someone purely performing total transparency. I wasn't scared for myself, but I saw the trap closing with absolute crystal clarity. Alexandra Blake was clearly used to dictating the exact version of the story everyone else believed. And right now in my diner she was doing exactly that. I need to ask you some questions, Hendricks told me, stepping away to pull me into a private chat. Of course, I replied. I answered it all, gave the cop the full timeline straight up, skipping absolutely nothing. The exact minute Sophia walked in, what clothes she had on, what the kid asked for, and what I had freely offered, where she slept, the fact that I never even touched her, that I didn't pry for personal details except to ask if she was in immediate danger. I hadn't done a single thing I wouldn't do for any struggling person walking through my diner doors. Hendricks kept writing. His face gave away absolutely nothing. Across the room, Sophia sat frozen on a stool while Alexandra hovered right beside her, not quite touching, never actually making contact, but hovering close enough to scream ownership, completely avoiding the formality of actual physical contact. Torres was questioning Sophia in hushed tones, and she was quietly answering him. Even from across the diner, I could see exactly what every single word was costing that girl. Her shaking hands were jammed together in her lap. Her terrified eyes kept darting sideways toward her mother's face. Look, we've all seen it. Every glance, she swallowed a truth she desperately wanted to tell, killing the sentence right before it turned into words. She ran away, I said, not aiming it at Hendricks specifically, but loudly, clearly into the open room. She came here on her own. She was terrified. I just helped her out. Alexandra turned toward me. No one asked you to. No, I said. That's usually how it works, though. Officer Hendricks glanced up from his notepad, then down again. From the corner booth, a tiny voice echoed with absolute certainty. It carried that fierce authority of a 6-year-old who saw something wrong and just didn't know how to keep quiet about it. My dad didn't do anything wrong, my Hannah declared. She was standing now right beside our booth, her math worksheet completely abandoned, clutching her stuffed rabbit in both arms. He made her soup, he let her sleep, he didn't do anything bad. The whole room froze, even Alexandra paused. You know how the pure certainty of a child's voice cuts through a room better than any adult argument ever could. It breaks a false story entirely, not with pure logic, but through the heavy, undeniable truth of words spoken without a hidden agenda. Torres looked right at Hannah, then at me. Then he glanced at Alexandra, his expression shifting just a fraction, but noticeably away from professional cop neutrality towards something much harder to define. Torres awkwardly cleared his throat. I think we should hear from Sophia, he announced, making sure no one else stayed too close. Alexandra's wealthy face went dead still. You've probably felt moments like that, where the power balance of a room completely flips, but nobody actually says a single word out loud. Alexandra didn't dare fight Torres on his suggestion, but she definitely didn't agree to it either. She did exactly what someone obsessed with control does when they hear a plan they utterly despise. She instantly reframed the room, shifting her focus back onto Officer Hendricks, launching a calculated debate about the strict legal limits of child custody. I just stepped back and let her talk. Meanwhile, Torres was already guiding young Sophia gently toward the far end of the diner counter, creating an informal sense of privacy with a few extra feet. Sophia walked over without fighting it, and I noticed something in her posture that felt totally different from the night before. She seemed less tense, as if getting some sleep and the warm morning breakfast, plus hanging out with my 6-year-old and her stuffed rabbit Carrot, had actually done something small but foundational to how she was holding her fragile self together. Officer Hendricks pulled a police form from his jacket and slid it across the counter toward me. Given that the teenage minor stayed here without her legal guardian's permission, Hendricks told me, I need you to sign a statement confirming that I'm not signing a single thing, I snapped back. Hendricks blinked hard. The cop clearly hadn't expected that rejection so fast. I understand what you're asking, I continued, my voice staying perfectly level, keeping the exact same register it had held since the second Alexandra first walked inside. And I get why the police report exists, but I never held that girl against her will. I didn't even invite her here. She stumbled in out of a freezing rainstorm, begged for shelter, and I just said yes. That is exactly what happened. If I sign a document implying anything else happened here, I'm telling a lie. And I'm just not going to do that. Hendricks stared at me for a long moment. This could really complicate things for you legally, he warned. I understand that, I told him, meaning it completely without any performance. You see, ever since my Julia died, I just hadn't been afraid of a complicated fight. I had completely recalibrated what frightening actually meant. The one specific thing I still stayed terrified of. You and I know that temptation, becoming the guy who lets bad things slide because keeping quiet is easier. I didn't learn that from being tough, I learned it from the permanent void left by a rescue that never bothered showing up. Alexandra had abruptly cut herself off. Her talk with Hendricks ended. She was studying me now with a careful look of someone rapidly recalculating their threat assessment. Beneath that icy surface, she was genuinely shocked. In her wealthy world, guys sitting in my exact social bracket. Diner owners, single dads, folks without expensive corporate lawyers, we usually folded. We apologized. We signed whatever paperwork and genuinely thanked them for the privilege. But I wasn't backing down. I just stood my ground right behind my own diner counter, staring back at her with zero hostility but absolutely zero respect either. Just a steady, unimpressed patience that clearly rattled her in a way she would never actually admit out loud. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," she snapped. "I don't think so," I replied. "I think you're doing that." My kid Hannah had resettled in her booth, completely ignoring her math homework. She just watched us, holding a pencil and gripping the edge of her blanket. She had my exact expression on her face, watchful, endlessly patient. Totally unimpressed by raw power, unless it actually stood for something right. Down at the far end of my counter, Sophia's voice finally rose. Not in panic, it sounded like the very first spark of real resolve. Officer Torres wasn't like his partner, he was quieter, way more careful. The kind of cop who knew from years on the job that the loudest mouth in a room was almost never telling the actual truth. He sat beside her on those far stools, keeping his notepad open but casually out of sight. He angled his body slightly away from her. A small, totally deliberate move to give her some breathing room. "You don't have to tell me anything you don't want to," he murmured. Crazy enough, that was the exact same sentence I had used the night before. "You know that look?" I saw her recognize those words, and the tight knot in her chest finally started to loosen. She started talking about the easy stuff. How her mother was always fiercely demanding. None of that was a secret. Alexandra Blake was featured in 7 major business magazines this past decade, and every single article mentioned it. Her impossible standards, her brutal precision, her relentless demand for pure perfection from anyone caught in her orbit. The world called it drive or vision. They called her inspiring with a completely straight face. But those puff pieces missed the truth, because reporters only ever talked to Alexandra. They never asked the people actually trapped inside her daily orbit. They didn't know what being managed instead of raised actually felt like. Sophia tried describing the nightmare to Officer Torres. She broke down her schedule, not some normal family routine, but a rigid, literal schedule. Printed out, laminated, and updated quarterly, dictating every single waking second from 6 in the morning until 9 at night. Stick with me here. She even had an approved contact list of people she was legally allowed to text. Listen closely, her whole life was updated by assistants. I heard her explain how her mother attended school plays, not to watch her perform, just to hand out brutal corrections afterward. Every wrong tone, every single time her posture dipped. Any answer that was just okay, never absolutely perfect. Torres just kept writing. She told him about the spy app on her phone, tracking way more than just calls and texts. It logged every app, every single website, every word typed into a search engine. At 13, she realized a deeply private message, sent to a friend about feeling overwhelmed, ended up on a printed summary her mother actually reviewed. She told Torres about the talk afterward. Cold, analytical, completely stripped of any anger. Alexandra simply claimed her daughter's texts impacted the family reputation, so constant surveillance was required. "Did anyone outside know?" I heard Torres ask. "People knew she was strict," Sophia replied. But nobody knew what strict actually meant indoors. The press releases, the junior board seats, those stiff corporate photos, that wasn't the start of the nightmare. It was just the exact second they accumulated. Crushing weight became entirely too heavy to carry anymore. Lying there while her mother picked her clothes, Sophia finally understood the truth. There was no version of her future inside that controlling system where she chose anything herself. Think about that. Her whole life mapped out, her very feelings pre-assigned. She didn't pack, she didn't plan, she just walked right out the door. She's not cruel, Sophia insisted, desperate to find the exact right word to make him understand. She doesn't hit me, she doesn't call me names. She just built a version of me that I'm forced to inhabit. And there's zero room for the real me. I watched Torres look up. That's a very precise way of putting it, he replied. I've had a long time to think about it, she said. Across my diner, Alexandra was still grilling Officer Hendricks, but her tone had definitely shifted. Less giving orders, way more on defense. I could see it without hearing a single word. I watched Hendricks ask a question, and suddenly that wealthy woman hesitated before answering. Sophia stared right down the counter toward her mother. They were maybe 30 feet apart right then, but it honestly felt like a perfect measurement of a much deeper, much older chasm. I was scared last night, Sophia whispered to Torres. But it was the first time in forever I wasn't scared of the person I was with. He didn't ask questions, he just made soup and let me sleep. Torres just nodded once, then shut his notepad tight. You and I know that look. He'd heard exactly what he needed to believe her. He slowly walked back toward the center of my diner, walking like a man who finally saw the truth but wasn't rushing it. He spoke quietly with Hendricks. I caught a low whisper I just couldn't make out. Then Officer Hendricks stopped writing on his form and capped his pen. I knew right away that meant something. Alexandra watched them closely. Her face kept that perfect mask, but the cold machinery underneath was shifting. You've met people like this. She scanned the room, hunting for any leverage. She needed absolute control, and right now this situation was slipping through her fingers. I have a few follow-up questions, Torres said, looking right at Alexandra for the very first time. My priority right now is getting my daughter home, Alexandra snapped. I understand. These will take a few minutes. He wasn't asking for her permission. She placed her designer bag on my counter, pure performance, faking total cooperation while she waited. Torres started asking about the tracking app on Sophia's phone. He asked about her approved contacts. He dug into that insane daily schedule. He kept his voice totally flat, just a calm, careful detective doing his job. No anger, no leading questions, just naming the abuse and waiting for her answer. With every question, the mother's answers grew just a little bit tighter. She wasn't dodging them, she was way too slick for that. But her tone shifted. The smug confidence from the first 15 minutes slowly turned into careful, calculated excuses. She claimed the tracker was standard parenting. The locked contacts were just for safety. The rigid schedule meant structure, and structure built strong discipline. And discipline, she argued, got a kid ready to face the harsh real world. She is 15, Torres said softly. I know my daughter's age. Most 15-year-olds can call friends. The whole diner felt it. I saw Hendricks slide quietly toward the front door, not blocking her exit, just quietly shifting the power dynamic in the room. Alexandra's voice stayed level, but the warmth completely vanished. The pauses between her perfectly rehearsed lies were getting shorter, and rushing meant she had less time to calculate her next move, which meant her mask was finally about to crack wide open. It happened fast. She doesn't need friends, she blurted out. Then, staring into Torres's dead silence, she finally seemed to realize how twisted that sounded. What she needs to be 15, Torres replied. He didn't yell, it wasn't a lecture. It was just the hard truth, delivered by a man who finally saw the monster no one else believed was there. Alexandra just froze. You know what happened next? Dead quiet, Sophia slid off her stool and walked straight toward my little girl's corner booth. She sat right down across from Hannah, moving with sudden absolute purpose. My daughter pushed her stuffed rabbit across the diner table. You can keep him a little longer, Hannah said. Are you sure? He likes you, Hannah whispered. He told me, Sophia laughed. It was a beautiful, genuine sound, too fast to be controlled, too real to be faked. That little laugh cut through the tension in my diner and landed somewhere full of hope. I heard it clearly from behind my counter. I turned my face away to hide what I was feeling. Alexandra just stared. Her daughter was actually laughing in my booth with my 6-year-old over a stuffed bunny. And whatever hit her in that exact moment, whatever painful truth finally landed between the perfect life she built and the broken girl I believed when no one else would, she kept hidden. She simply grabbed her designer bag and whispered to her lawyer. A new deal was being formed right there, not her original threat, but a compromise anyway. I made sure to stay completely out of what came next. I just stepped back behind my counter and started a fresh pot of coffee. Because no matter what madness happened next, folks were in my diner. And folks in my diner get their coffee. The real fallout dragged out over the coming weeks, far from my counter. It happened in sterile offices, in closed-door meetings I wasn't part of, and sure as hell didn't want to be. Officer Torres filed his report. The higher-ups finally reviewed the paperwork. The system ground forward the way official things do, slowly. Messy, boring, but for once it actually protected her. Alexandra Blake had serious money, but even heavy wealth hits a wall. And the system, when fed the actual truth, doesn't always bow down the way the rich expect. Child services showed up at her mansion. A school counselor got assigned. A judge pulled Alexandra into a serious talk. I never learned what they said. What I did piece together was that a totally new arrangement was made. A deal that included some very strict new rules. An independent voice to actually believe Sophia from now on. Alexandra never apologized to me. I honestly didn't expect her to. What she did do, and I heard this straight from Torres, who swung by for his morning coffee 3 weeks later, was quietly drop every single legal complaint against my diner. That nasty legal paperwork her lawyer waved around just vanished. My diner stayed off the public records minus the first dispatch call, which simply noted a missing teen was found here and sent to appropriate care. Returned to appropriate care, that sterile phrase still scared me. I just prayed they actually believed her this time around. Sophia got a message to me once through Officer Torres. He handed it over quietly, knowing exactly how to handle these fragile abuse cases. The letter was short. It read, "Thank you for the soup." I read it and let out a tired, surprised laugh I hadn't seen coming. Then I carefully folded the paper and tucked it inside the drawer right beneath my register, with the few things I actually treasure. 3 weeks after the storm finally broke on a Saturday morning, Hannah sat in her corner booth with a new worksheet, feeling a deep comfort that had, if anything, only grown stronger since that crazy, terrifying night. She was puzzling over a math problem about driving distances, figuring out how far a car goes in 2 hours when she suddenly looked up at me. I was scrubbing the espresso machine down, trying to keep my nervous hands busy. "Dad," she said quietly, "do you wish you hadn't let her stay?" I set down the cleaning cloth. I thought about it like I handle anything that actually matters, carefully, without rushing, refusing to shrink the problem down into something simple. I thought about those 2 cops walking in, about Alexandra claiming she was taken, the paperwork I refused to sign, about Officer Torres shutting his notepad with that harsh look. Then I remembered the laugh, Sophia's laugh. Pure, with absolutely zero calculation behind it. "No," I told my daughter, "I don't." Hannah chewed on that. "Even though it was terrifying, especially because it was terrifying," I added. "Doing the right thing and the hard thing, they're usually the exact same. That is never a sign to just walk away. It's just the price tag of taking a stand." My girl sat with that for a minute, exactly how she handles tough homework problems. Never rushing an answer, just sitting in the uncomfortable space until things started making sense. "Okay," she finally murmured, diving straight back into her worksheet. I grabbed the rag again and turned back to the espresso machine. Out front, headlights swept into the dark lot. The bell hanging over the entrance hadn't jingled yet, but it would, and I would be ready. I'm always ready. That is just the reality of running a late-night diner. You have to face whatever drags itself inside on any night in absolutely any condition. I didn't build Carter's Diner to make some grand statement. I built a spot that kept the lights on, because keeping the lights on was what I knew. And sometimes, when that freezing rain starts blowing completely sideways, and a terrified runaway spots your neon sign at the end of a pitch-black highway, that ends up being enough. You and I both know kindness isn't safe, it's almost never clean. There is no guarantee the person you help will even say thank you, or that the police will treat you fairly, or that you'll walk away without a scratch. I knew every bit of that risk and made my call anyway. Not because I was banking on a perfect outcome, but because a guy who already lost what mattered most to him in life gets a very sharp sense of what is actually worth throwing punches for. I didn't try to protect myself that stormy night. I protected something deeper. See, the hardest thing isn't saving yourself, it's defending someone nobody else believes. Every good father protects his kid. That's completely given, hardwired into your DNA way before love turns into any kind of complicated, messy decision. But I think you and I agree that a real person sometimes has to protect people outside their own family. Sometimes you stand right on the bleeding edge of what's easy versus what's right. You dig your boots into the correct side of that line and hold firm. That's exactly what I decided to do. No hero complex, Haas, absolutely zero apologies. Out in the lot, that car finally killed its engine. A door popped open, boots crunched on wet gravel. My front doorbell jingled, ringing out sharp and clear, just like it always does. And I glanced up the exact same way I always do, completely, totally ready.